Okay, and let me share my screen with you. Okay, so let's see. Oh, good morning, Johanna.
Good morning, Professor. Hi, everyone.
I'm okay, and you?
I'm fine too, thank you.
Oh, good to hear. People, in the last class, we are discussing about the voids and how the type, the shape of voids could express some specific process that can help us to understand how soil was formed and evolved through time. Okay, and we discussed about this vesicular voids, this circular shaped voids, and how they could express soils that was waterlogged, or soils that has a lot of water and could be influenced in the past by the tidal water or the water table level, something like that. Okay, we can easily see this in micromorphology, describing the soil in the field, or we also can see this in micromorphology in thin sections with this kind of voids. They are the same, they are vesicular voids here and here, okay? And let me just, I forgot my pen, but you can see here in the micromorphology and here in the micromorphology descriptions in thin sections, we can see the same shape, the same type of void, and they express the same feature. This horizon or this layer was influenced by water in the past, okay? And this type of shape could help us to understand that this specific horizon or layer was influenced by a water tidal water table or a high quantity of water in the condition that formed this horizon. Okay, we have other types of voids, of pores, and we have this tubular or dendritic tubular voids. They are this kind of voids that express action of life, that express action of termites or ants, worm. They are wormholes, or they are expression of roots that format this kind of voids because they grow inside on specific horizon or a layer, and after the death of this plant, of this vegetable, the organic material was decomposed and the void express an ancient action of this root there. So the dendritic tubular or the tubular voids, they express biological activity. And so it helps us to understand how deep the organisms act in that soil, how deep they mix the soil. And we can easily see this in the surface horizons or horizons that very close to surface, but we also can use these features to identify a buried horizon or a buried surface horizon, especially these buried surface horizons, because this specific horizons that was formed in the past in the surface and they are buried after that, they present a lot of tubular and dendritic tubular voids. Especially the surface horizons present a very common type of voids that are tubular and dendritic tubular. But of course, we can see them in subsurface horizons and very deep subsurface horizons, depending on the water table level and the climate conditions. When we have drier conditions, we have a water table that's very, very deep. These features seems to be very deep too, because they are close to the water table. And when we have water conditions, wet conditions with a lot of water available, we have these features very close to surface because it's not so dry and they can be very close to surface. So we usually can see several layers or several phases of these features, of this kind of voids, and they could express the climate condition, and the age that they are formed can express the climate conditions variation through time. So in the same soil profile, we can see this kind of features in the surface and in subsurface or very deep horizons or layers. And if we can date the organic materials in this inside these voids or in the neighborhood of this kind of voids, we can understand when they are created and which climate condition could be related to this kind of feature. Okay. Other kind of voids that are very important are the irregular, okay, like these ones. They are formed by weathering, so they are very common in sea horizons or horizons that was cemented by iron or calcium carbonate or other cemented agent, okay, and they express an incipient weathering, the beginning of the weathering in this layer or this horizon. So if I see a rock layer or a sea horizon or a sea layer that presents this kind of voids, they express an incipient stage of weathering because the primary minerals, they start to be weathering, and the weathering leach the material and form and compose this kind of voids. Voids that doesn't seems to have a specific shape. They present different sizes and different shapes because they are only composed or only formed by the weathering of primary minerals. Okay. Here we can see in a microscope feature, in a microscope sample, and here we can see the same kind of voids in thin sections. This black material here only express these voids that are formed by the weathering of some minerals and the formation of some specific shapes or specific voids that can release these materials like calcium, potassium, and other nutrients. We also can see the interstitial voids. They are formed by the contact between the coarse material like fragments of rocks or even coarse fragments like sand. Okay, we can see easily in this white area that we have voids, that we have pores formed between this coarse and this coarse grains, this sand and this sand grains. So this is a kind of void formed in materials that has a sandy texture, or they have a incipient weathering and they present only coarse materials like rock fragments in this specific case. Beyond the type the shape of the voids, we can describe other features that express the evolution of soil through time. And one of them is quite important to us to understand the biological activity and the chemical and physical changes in soils, and they are the rhizoliths. The rhizoliths express the action of roots in the past, and they can be seen like rhizoconcretions, like in this picture. We can see here and here when I'm showing, and here and here we can see a broken rhizoconcretion. So these areas are features that express an ancient root that grow inside the soil, but this root was covered by calcium carbonate. In this case was calcium carbonate, and the calcium carbonate preserve this root. We can see in this area, in the site, that there's not root here anymore. So the root was completely decomposed. So all the organic material that composed the root was weathered, was destroyed, and all this material, all this void that was formed by the destruction of the root was fulfilled by calcium carbonate. So we have some features that looks like roots, but they are not roots anymore. They are only rhizoconcretions or rhizoliths. We usually see this kind of materials, this kind of features in areas that we have high content of calcium carbonate, like in this area. I took this picture in Ararip Plateau, in a region that we have some limestones, so calcium carbonate is abundant in this area, and these soils present a lot of calcium carbonate, and of course, when they migrate inside the voids, they could cover these roots, and they could create the cemented features, these calcium-rich cemented features that preserve the shape of roots inside the soil, and now we can see these materials, okay? We can date these rhizoconcretions and know when they was formed. It's a very good information to us when they are formed. We could know that they are formed in well-drained conditions, so the soil is not formed in waterlogged conditions, because they need to migrate through the soil, and they need to cement these roots, but we have a condition that's not so wet. We don't have so much rain, because we need to precipitate, to favor the precipitation of calcium carbonate. If we have a very wet condition in a well-drained soil, we can't form this cemented materials, these cemented features. So we have some rain, but it's not too rain, it's not too wet to form cemented materials, cemented features, okay? We can see this kind of rhizoliths close to roots, but we can see this kind of materials close to tubules, like voids that are formed by animal activity, like wormholes can be cemented by calcium carbonate. We can see these materials fulfilling some ounce voids, and voids formed by termites too. It's not so common like in the roots, like in the rhizoconcretions, but we can also see this kind of materials, okay? And we can see some root models in these areas too that are formed that vary by the variation of pH, okay, and especially by the exudation, by the yielding of some acids that produce a specific color that's close to the void. And we can see in some cases voids with different colors, dark color or darker than the neighborhood. So express an area that's rich in or acid, organic acid, and it presents a different color and sometimes even a different texture, or these root malts could be formed by a cemented material. So we have some voids that are preserved by organic deposition, organic acids that were yields from roots. Okay. And sometimes we can see the petrification of roots as something like a diagenetic process when we have the change of carbon by silicon. So we can change the chemical composition of these materials, and the organic material, the organic roots, are transformed by the inclusion or the substitution of carbon by silicon, and we increase the persistence and the resistance of these materials. And now we can see some roots inside the soil, but they are not lived roots, they are preserved roots by the change of carbon by silicon.
Professor,
Other, oh, okay.
I didn't understand much about root models, and the difference between them and rhizoccretions. Rhizoccretions.
Okay. The rhizoconcretions are something like this when we have external cemented agent, like the calcium carbonate act like a cement agent that produce this feature that you can see here in this picture. We have something external from the roots that create this feature. Like we can see here, the calcium carbonate only cover the root and produce the cemented feature. It's the case of rhizoconcretions. Okay, the root models, they are formed by the root. So the root yields, the root favor the formation of something that could be preserved inside the soil. The root yields, the root exudate on specific substance, and we can see in general they are organic acids that change the pH of the soil, and this pH gets down, that gets very acid and rich in organic materials. So this acid and organic rich layer very close to the root gets a different color and a different pH. And when we have very acid conditions and very acid, very rich in organic materials, they could be preserved in very close area to the void and couldn't be decomposed by microorganisms. And so we get a very close area to the roots that present a dark color and a very acid pH. If we have a climate change, like this soil change from a wet condition to a dry condition, you reduce the water content in this soil. This area can be dehydrated, and when this area gets dry, you have the cementation of this area by organic matter, by the organic matter that was yelled by the root, the organic acids that was yelled by the roots. So you have the preservation of the voids that was created by the roots because the roots yelled, exudate something, in this case, acid, organic acids. Could you understand the difference now? The rot moods, they are formed by something that roots exudate. In general, they are organic acids, and these organic acids gets a cemented material when you change from a wet to a dry climate. In this case, in the rhizoconcretions, you have an external cemented agent like the calcium carbonate.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Okay? Oh,
Great.
very good. Very good. All of them express biological activity, of course, but you should understand that they express different conditions, especially different climate conditions. Like I said, the rhizoconcretions, they generally express dry conditions. They express dry climate conditions because you need dry conditions to compose, to form, to favor the formation of calcium carbonate nodules. Okay, calcium carbonate cemented features. But in the root models, you need a wet climate, but a change from a wet to a dry climate. So it's a different interpretation of the soil. Okay, this was formed in dry conditions all the time. So I can see the rhizoconcretions. Okay, and in this case, I see root models, and this means that this area has a wet climate in the past, but changed to a drier condition. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Good, good, very good. We also can see the evaporites, and the evaporites, they are very good features that express the chemical, the physical chemical conditions that formed soils. They are not so abundant, so we can see in all the soils, but when you find something like an evaporite, he tells us a lot about the formation of that horizon or layer. For example, if I found some calcite nodules or crystals, calcite is calcium carbonate, so tell us that that material was formed in water stressor conditions, and present us that this calcite was formed in an area that present dry conditions when the evapotranspiration is higher than the precipitation. Okay, is what I want to say when I said that's water stressed conditions. So we have an evapotranspiration higher than the precipitation in that area. So the leaching of the calcium carbonate is not so high, and you favor the concentration and the precipitation of calcite, of calcium carbonate in an area. And we have well-drained soils. As I said, we need to present a high porous soils with a high porosity that favor the migration of calcium carbonate in the soil from the surface to the subsurface or from the subsurface to the surface. Okay, and this migration of water favor also the migration of nutrients and favor the migration of calcium, and could favor the precipitation of calcium carbonate or calcite. Okay, so the presence of calcite tell us, okay, this soil could be formed in water-stressed conditions in well-drained soils. So I can see something that's very close to a semi-arid or arid region that is like now. Nowadays, we present a semi-arid condition in northeastern Brazilian. So, okay, we can see calcite forming right now there. But I should understand that when I have a horizon or a layer that present calcite, we have this specific condition, semi-arid or arid climate condition. That area that express a water-stressed condition in well-drained soils. Or in minor examples, we can see poorly drained soils. Okay, when we have water-stressed conditions in poorly drained soils, soils that can't uh, can migrate water very easily. And in these conditions, we have rocks very close to the surface, or we have a cemented layer very close to surface, or we have a layer with has low porosity and very close to surface. We usually can see this calcite formation very close to surface. Why they are not so common? Because we need that water migrate from the surface to the subsurface, or migrate from the subsurface to the surface to concentrate calcium. If we have poorly drained soils, if we can easily migrate water in these areas, maybe we can't concentrate calcium and we can't formate calcium carbonate. Okay, we need to migrate calcium, to concentrate calcium to produce a high content of calcium that could create calcium carbonate. It's because calcium carbonate, it's only precipitate in high concentration of calcium. If you have a low concentration of calcium, you can't produce calcite. And poorly drained soils, they generally don't have a high area that could yield calcium, or you only have the stagnation of water. And if you have the stagnation of water, you can't concentrate calcium and you can't produce calcium carbonate. Okay, in specific conditions, we can see calcite formed in poorly drained soils, but when the soil is formed by limestones, when the soil is formed from parent materials that are rich in calcium carbonate. So, okay, they can be poorly drained soils, but even when they are poorly drained soils, we can see a high content of calcium carbonate because the parent material already have a high content of calcium carbonate. So it's easy to concentrate these materials and form calcite, okay? So the general condition to formate calcites in soils is that you have a water-stressed condition, arid or semi-arid conditions. You have a higher evapotranspiration than the precipitation, and the soils are well drained. Okay, and in specific cases, we can see poorly drained soils that form calcite, but in general, they are related to calcium-rich materials, calcium-rich parent materials. We can see siderite too. And what is siderite? Siderite is a kind of iron carbonate. Oh, I did a mistake here. Just need to change its low pH here. I'm sorry. So siderite, it's a iron carbonate but it's only formed when we have a high concentration, a high content of iron 2, and we have a low concentration, a low content of calcium and sulfate. So we need a high content of iron 2, and we need a high content of carbonate, and carbonate it's high when we have a high respiration of roots. The roots increase the content of the pressure of carbonate inside the soil, and we have a high content of iron 2 only in anoxic conditions, when we have poorly drained soils, when we have a condition of a water table very close to surface or influencing horizon or layer. We have tidal water. Tidal water is not so common to formate siderite because they generally present a high content of sulfate, and to form siderite, we have low content of sulfate. So the siderite is more common to be associated to areas that present a water table, a high water table, and a high organic activity that produce a high pressure of carbonate inside the soil, and at the same time you have a high content, a high concentration of iron 2 inside the soil. In this case, you can combine and form siderite, iron, carbonate, and we can see, okay, in this specific case, we had in the past a low calcium content, and we have a low sulfate content, and we have anoxic conditions, because anoxic conditions favor the formation and stabilization of iron 2, not iron 3. Okay, so if you found siderite in a horizon or in a layer, you can understand that that horizon or that layer was formed in anoxic conditions, was formed by the influence of the water table. And we can see that the majority or all the voids, they are fulfilled by water, and there's anoxic conditions favor the formation of iron 2, and the high content, the high concentration of iron 2 formed iron carbonate in that area. Okay, you can see that's very different from calcite, because to form calcite we need generally well-drained conditions, and here we can't present well-drained conditions. To form siderite, you should present poorly drained conditions always, because we need to form and we need to stabilize iron 2, and we only have a high content of iron 2 in anoxic conditions, when water table it's very close to surface, or layer or horizon it's below the water table. Okay, you should understand that they are formed in different conditions. So if you present calcite in a specific horizon, and below that we can find siderite, they are formed in different conditions. The siderite was formed in a horizon or layer that was formed below the water table level, and calcite was formed above the water table level, and they are formed in different conditions. Okay, other kind of salt, of other kind of evaporite that tell us a lot about the formation of a specific layer, soil, or even a horizon, is the presence of gypsum, because to form calcium sulfate, you have to present a soil with a high content of sulfates. And to present a high content of sulfate, you should present influence of tidal water, because the tidal water present a high content of sulfate. The water from the sea present a higher content of sulfates, and they could contribute to formation of gypsum, okay? Generally, the water from the rivers and lagoons, they generally present a low content of sulfates. Why I'm telling that generally they present a low content of sulfates? Because the content of sulfates depends especially of the climate and the rock, the parental material of the soil. If you have arid or a semi-arid condition, even if you don't have a rock with a high content of sulfate, you can concentrate sulfate and you can form a soil that present a high content of sulfate. Okay, so if we walk on Himalayas, or we can talk in Andean regions, when we have semi-arid or even arid conditions, we can produce soils with a high content of sulfate, okay? And of course, they are very far from the sea. So even if I have very far from the sea, I can concentrate sulfate if I have today or in the past arid or semi-arid conditions. If I have evapotranspiration higher, much higher than the precipitation. Okay, so we can concentrate sulfate in soil in these conditions. Or if I have soil that's very close to the sea, that present influence of tidal water, and it's poorly drained soil, and there we have some calcium that could be released from the organic materials, or that could be released the weathering of primary minerals, and combine the calcium and sulfite and form gypsum. So they are a condition, they are salts that are formed in different conditions from the two below. We can see the calcite that's formed in water-stressed conditions in well-drained soils. It's very common to identify calcite. We can see the siderite formed in anoxic conditions when we have low content of calcium and low content of sulfates, which should present a high content of iron and high biological activity, and the gypsum that's formed in areas where we have a high content of sulfate, because the proximity, they are very close to the sea and they have a high content of sulfate, or because we have water stressed conditions, we have evapotranspiration that's very higher than the precipitation. Okay, everyone could understand that they are formed in specific different conditions.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Here are just some examples that we can see. Here, some calcites, models, and concretions of calcites. So they express that we have a high content of calcium in these conditions, and they present, in this case, it's very easily to see that we have a high content of carbonates. They are generally related to a high content of organic matter. So this dark color seems to us that we have a high content of carbon and carbonate, and this high content of carbonate and calcium could favor the presence of calcium carbonate. Probably they are formed in the actual and nowadays conditions. And here we can see these concretions of calcium carbonate. They are very large concretions or nodules, and the vegetation is not so dense. The surface horizon is not so dark. So probably they are formed in the past, not formed today, and they are concentrated in this layer, in this specific layer, so we can date this material and know when they are produced, okay? And we can understand that when they are produced, they are related to a dry climate, or when evapotranspiration was higher than the precipitation. We can also see in these conditions, they are formed in the soil. They are not layers that formed by uh, limestone that was weathering. So all these concretions and nodules of calcium carbonate was formed because we have dry conditions. We also can see in thin sections the precipitation of calcium carbonate, like in this circular or ovoid shapes. They are nodules of calcium carbonate, okay? And they present concentric organization, concentric shape too. It's very interesting because we can date all these materials, all these layers that compose this nodule. This is some acicular crystals of gypsum, of calcium sulfate. So we can understand that they are formed in a condition that has a lot of influence of tidal water. So they are formed in a specific layer that was influenced by tidal water in this specific case. So we have the influence of sea level that contributes to the sulfate content and form gypsum. We can see in thin sections too, like these wedge shapes. They are crystals of gypsum. So we can see here and here very easily. Here too, we can see these crystals that was formed. Here we can see some voids that was fulfilled by crystals of gypsum. So we should understand that the void are older than these crystals, and the crystals was formed after the formation of the void. So some roots or the weathering of primary minerals formed the voids, and after that, this material was influenced by sea level, by the water table, by the tidal water table. So the high sulfate content induce or favor the precipitation of gypsum inside the voids, as we can see here. We also have other features that help us a lot to describe how the soils was formed, and they are the argillic features. These argillic features are related to clay migration or clay production inside the soil, and they are very important because the clay migration, the migration of clay from the surface to the subsurface horizon, or from the subsurface horizon to the surface, because we have these two ways, two directions of movements. They are expressions of a constant climate condition. Okay, so the migration of clay minerals from the surface to the surface to the subsurface horizons, this migration, according to gravity, they need a stability, a tectonic and climatic stability, but especially the climatic stability. So the formation of argillons, clay coatings, or infillings of clay minerals they show us that that horizon or that layer was formed under stability that express a climatic and tectonic stability. Okay, if we see some change of these argillic features, we can see some change of tectonic conditions, and we will discuss about that. Okay, we usually describe the color of these materials because the color of the argillic features express which minerals we can see there. And of course, according to the minerals that you can see there, you can understand the weathering and the leaching and the chemical composition of this material. If we have yellow argillic features, so they are composed by um, materials that are not so rich in iron, or they are rich in goethite and they did not present hematite. So the pH of soil that produce that clay materials, that clay size materials, that clay minerals, they was very acidic or acidic, and we have moist or wet conditions, and we have a low iron content or a high content, but with a high content of water and a high biological activity. So these conditions formed goethite and couldn't or did not favor the formation of hematite, and so produce a yellow color. So yellow argillic features express us the presence of goethite, and the presence of goethite show or tell us that those materials was formed in acidic conditions, acidic pH, with a low content of iron and a high biological activity that demands a high content of water. So if I can see yellow argillic features, I should understand that they was formed in wet conditions, wet climate conditions. Okay. And if I see red argillic features, red argillic features are related to dry conditions. So I have evapotranspiration that's higher than the precipitation, or I have a higher content of iron in comparison to that yellow argillic features. So I have a high content of iron, or I don't have so wet conditions and I have a low biological activity. And I formed horizons or layers that present a low organic carbon content. So the red argillic features are related to those horizons, layers, soils that did not present a high biological activity because the climate is not so wet or even dry, and the organic carbon it's very low, the organic activity is very low, the water content is very low, and you favor and you produce hematite. And hematite, of course, present a red color. So the color of these argillic features, it's very important to understand which climate conditions and which kind of vegetation could I see and could I relate to formation of this horizon or layers. Okay. Some paleosols, they produce a change of color after the burial of the horizons or layers. So generally we can see that yellow horizons or layers or soils, they get red, and they get redder when they were buried, because they start to get dry and dry and dry. So goethite change or turns into hematite because lose water. Okay, so we need to be very careful to understand how color could express the formation of these materials. So, JJ, how could I relate the color of these paleosols with the climate conditions that form these horizons? We need to see other features to relate with the climate conditions. One example is the nature of the organic materials. Okay, we will discuss in the next class how the organic materials could express if that organic carbon was related to a dry kind of vegetation or a wet kind of vegetation, like a rainforest, a savanna, or even drier than that. Okay, so the nature of the organic material, the organic carbon, it's very important to understand when or which kind of conditions, not when, but which kind of conditions, climate conditions, do we have when that horizon was formed? Because the nature of these organic carbon compounds, they didn't change for time. Okay, so they preserve a signature of the climate material, that climate conditions that form that horizon or layer. So be careful. The color of these horizons can change for time. So we need to be very careful. Okay, this horizon present a red color, but the nature of the organic carbons express that they were formed in wet or very wet conditions. So this horizon or these layers was formed in wet conditions, but after a burial, when they was buried, this horizon gets dry and dry and dry and now presents a red color. And so we have a change of which minerals can we found here, and it also can help us to understand some specific change that occurred after the burying of these horizons or layers. Okay, so we need to know when some specific properties, features could change, and if they was formed during the formation of that horizon or after that. Okay, and the color of these materials, they could change. So we need to see other features to relate with this specific change, or if they preserve the initial condition that formed that horizon or that layer. Just to show you what are these argillic features, they could be these clay skins that we can see in the surface of the aggregates or the pads. This shiny surface express the migration of clays. So clay migrate from the surface horizon to the subsurface horizon and produce this shiny surface. Okay, how this shiny surface was produced, you should understand that when clay migrate from the surface, the clay migrates inside the voids with the water. So water penetrates by the voids and migrates following the gravity. And when water migrates inside these voids, they carry on clay minerals. And when this water reduce its velocity, so the velocity is not so high and water start to penetrate in low conditions, it's not slow conductivity, So these materials, these clay minerals, they start to precipitate inside the voids because the velocity of water start to decrease. So these materials start to precipitate on the surface of the aggregates or in the wall or the voids. They are the same. The wall of the voids or the surface of the aggregates, they are the same materials. It's only the perspective that you have, okay? And how they precipitate in a very slow condition, they generally precipitate in a parallel condition to the surface, and how they present this this layer of clays that are precipitating in the surface of the aggregate. They present, let me show you again here, they present like a clay skin on the surface of the aggregate. And this clay skin, they are shiny because reflect the sunlight. So these clay skins, this shine surface, express a migration of clay from the surface to the subsurface horizons. Okay, and this only occurs when we have a well-drained soil, because we need to see the migration of water inside the voids. You don't need wet conditions, but you need migration. Water should migrate. And which part of the soil the water stop to migrate? When we are very close to the sea horizon, or when we are very close to a cemented horizon or layer that has a very low porosity that reduce the velocity of the water. So the formation of shiny horizons tell us when the velocity of water reduce very fast. And we can say, okay, in the same soil profile, I can see 3 or 4 specific horizons with present shiny pads, shiny surfaces. So I can understand that these 3 or 4 different horizons, they are related to different conditions, different migration water conditions, that in the deepest format in the beginning, it's the oldest horizon, it's the oldest shiny surface horizon, because the water migrate from all the horizons and stop to migrate there. So the clays start to produce a clay skin in the surface of these pads. And after that, the water stop in a above condition, in more close to surface condition, and create other horizon that present shiny surface colors, surface horizons, I say, I'm sorry. And after that, they produce another horizon that present shiny surface. So these different horizons that present different shine surface, they have different ages, and they are related to different conditions. The deepest is the oldest, and it's very close to surface is the newest, is the youngest. Okay. Here we can see very easily this clay skins in the surface. So present and show us that this horizon express migration of clay from the surface to the subsurface, okay? We also can see clay bridges that are these materials that form a connection between coarse grains. So we have this sand grains, and between the sand grains, we have this clay bridges, these thin materials that form clay bridges between the coarse materials. They also express clay migration. So when we see these clay bridges between coarse fractions, we should tell, okay, this horizon, it register a clay migration in the past or today, okay, before talking about a modern soil, okay, but it's express migration of clay. So this specific layer or specific horizon are receiving clay. So this is a alluvial clay that now forms bridges between coarse grains, between sand grains. Okay. We also can see some, some coatings around the coarse materials. So here we can see a sand coarse material, here another fragment of sandy, and here another particle of sandy, and around them we can see a film of clay that we call a clay coating. So these clay coatings, these revestments, they are formed by clay alluviation, clay migration. So if I found this kind of fabric in a specific soil, in a specific horizon or layer, I know that this horizon presents alluvial clay. So this clay coating express the migration of clay. And so this migration of clay express stability, tectonic and climatic stability. Okay? This is other thin section that express again the migration of clay inside the voids and the formation of fillings. So we can see in this white area, and here, and here, and here, and here, they are voids. And we can see in this area, this orange or red and yellow fabric. We have here the aggregates, the pads, and between these materials, these white colors and these orange regions, we have these areas that present a different fabric. And these areas, they are ancient voids that are fulfilled by clay. So the deposition of clay here was so intense that almost all the void was fulfilled by clay. Okay, so you should imagine that here we have a void and in the past, but we start the precipitation of clay, and the deposition of clay was so intense that now we don't have a void anymore, and all the void is fulfilled by clays. And it's so interesting that we can see here the layers of deposition, and these layers of deposition of clay show us different minerals because we have different color. And these yellow phases, they express wet conditions, wet climate conditions, and this reddish layers express us drier conditions. So we have in the same void layers that express different climate conditions, wet and dry. So if I collect a sample here and date this material, I can understand and I can know when this goethite was formed and when this hematite was formed, so I know the age of these alluvial features, these argonic features, okay? And I can know when in the past I have a wet condition and when it gets dry or even drier than in the past, okay? How much close the clay material is to the surface of the void, it's older, and how I got in the center, in the middle of the void, it's older, okay? Oh, it's youngest, I'm sorry. So this area that's very close to the wall of the void is the oldest region, and in the middle of the void, I can see the youngest ages. Why? Because these voids, they start to deposit materials in the walls and they are reducing its size until they are all fulfilled in the middle of the void. Okay, so we usually start the deposition of material in the walls of the void, and the void are reducing its size until they are all fulfilled by materials, okay, by the clay materials. They are not fulfilled by sand and silt because sand and silt are too large to migrate inside the voids. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, this picture, it's very good. It's very interesting because show us how these materials was deposited, and we can see that in this black lines that we call extension lines, these extension lines are even or only black lines, okay? These black or extension lines show us that all the clays are oriented. They was deposited in the same direction. So if they was deposited in the same direction, we have a tectonic stability which formed all this feature. So we can see in this void that we have a climate change from wet to dry, but when we see here, we see that all the clays were deposited in the same direction, so the soil did not change its direction of the migration of the clays. You only change the climate, but you didn't change the direction of the migration, of the alluviation. So we have to form all this feature a tectonic stability. We don't have any kind of change of the tectonic material. We don't have any kind of uplifting or slowing or dowing material or dowing movement, I'm sorry. We don't have any kind of tectonic movement that change the position of the soil, but we have a climate change from wet to drier conditions. And how can I say that? In the Sphinx sections, every time that I can see these black lines that we call in micromorphology extension lines, these extension lines show that all material was deposited in the same direction and show us this extension lines. We could talk about extension lines in the next class when we discuss specifically how micromorphology analysis can help us a lot to understand how these materials was formed. But by now, you just need to understand that these black lines that we call extension lines are only formed when the clay materials was deposited in the same direction. So all the clays was deposited in the same direction, and I can't see like materials that was deposited in a angle, and after that we have other angle. No, all clays were deposited in the same angle, and they now form these black lines. Okay, and now I could understand if they have the same angle of deposition, it's because I did not register any kind of tectonic change. Okay, if I use an equipment that could date formation of these oxides, like the goethite and hematite, I could date the formation of the alluvial material, and I could say, okay, I have a change of climate conditions, but the tectonic material was the same, the tectonic base was the same. I did not register any kind of tectonic change during the formation of this feature, okay? Because they present these extension lines. Other kind of features that are very important to understand the formation of soils are shrink and shelf features, or we just can call them compression or pressure features. They are formed by the compression of the materials or the pressure of the materials. They are formed in soils that present a high content of clay and especially a high content of high activity clays. So they are expensive clays that change its size, its volume according to the water content. So in the wet season, the soil increase its volume because water change the volume, the size of these materials, and in the drier condition, the drier season, they reduce its volume, and when reduce the particles, the aggregates, the pads, they start to be compressed against each other and produce some shrink and shelf features by compression or pressure of these materials, producing shiny surfaces. But now these shiny surfaces are not produced by the clay migration through the soil. They are not by the clay alluviation, but by the compression or pressure of aggregates. The compression of the aggregates produce an orientation of clay in the surface and produce now shiny surfaces. Okay, let's show some of them. The first shrink and swell features that we can see and are these cracks and the formation of wedge fixtures, wedge shaped fixtures like this one. We can see very easily a wedge shape, okay, here. So we can see aggregates that present a wedge shape, and they are formed by this kind of crack that usually are higher, are not so higher, but it's more intense close to surface than in the subsurface, because here we have higher temperatures, and in this case the crack formation it's more intense, so you produce this kind of wedge shapes, and we can easily see these cracks in these materials when you have a high content of clay and a high content of high activity clay or expensive materials. Here we can see some compression surfaces. It's very easily to see because we have shiny surfaces, but these shiny surfaces are forming only in planar voids. So we can see shiny surfaces only in planar surfaces. It's not like the alluvial materials that usually are formed in irregular or wavy surfaces, like diluvial features, the clay skins, the typical clay skins that we saw. Here, we only form it in planar voids or planar surfaces because you need the contact between the aggregates, the pads, and they need to compress each other. And now we have the formation of this shiny surface by the compression of the material. Okay? It's quite easy to do this in the field. If you get two pads and you just pressure one against each other, you can produce this pressure features because only the compression produces the orientation of clay. Okay? We can see here this compression features too. Here we can see the silicon sides. The silicon sides, they are features formed by the pressure of the material and the migration of the pads against one against each other. In this case, the pads, the aggregates are compressed one against each other, but the material can change the direction and they can be pressured one against each other and produce these shiny surfaces, but we can see these lines. So we can easily see these lines that express the migration of one pad above each other. Okay? It's only formed in materials that are rich in clay and rich in high activity clays. You can see here too, you can see easily a shiny surface here, and we can see some lines here. And these lines are formed by the migration of the material because it was pressured, and when it was pressured, we can see a migration of material. It's not migration of clay, but migration of material. One pad against each other, producing this clay surface and these lines that represent the migration of materials. Okay? We can see also the jugai is this kind of microleaf. Jugai here, it's a kind of microrelief that we can see in the surface of soils that present a high content of clay and a high content of high activity clay. Okay, so they are formed by the shrink and swelling process, the expansion of the material and the retraction of the material produce this kind of feature. So if you see this kind of feature in a paleosoil, you can understand that the soil was formed in probably in drier conditions or when the evapotranspiration was higher than the precipitation, or if the parent material was exposed to weathering, but that parent material is exposed by a brief but not so long time, so it's not so wafered and produce high activity clays, expensive clays, and these expensive clays produce this kind of feature. So we can understand that this material was rich in very easily wafering materials. So if they are rich in very easily wafer material, is because something did not allow intense weathering. And how can I did not register intense weathering? Because leaching and weathering is not so high because we have a dry climate condition, or if we have a parent material that was recently exposed to weathering. Okay. Other kind of feature that, oh, okay. Someone have a doubt?
Maybe I don't have, but I don't have doubt,
Nidhi,
but I want to confirm the place of pedal tubes and then microfabrics. What are they?
oh, Nidhi, could you repeat, please? I couldn't understand you very well. Just a
Okay,
moment. Let me turn off my microphone and use. Okay, just a moment. Try now, please.
okay. I don't
Oh,
have doubts, but I want to confirm the place of pedal tubes and
mhm.
then microfabrics. Are they also part of these compression and pressure features? The pedal tubes and microfabrics.
You have what? I'm sorry. Can you repeat, please? In
Okay. Microfabric and pedal tubes. As in their place, are they also part of compression and pressure features? As in, are they also formed by shrink and swell features?
mm-hmm,
Did you get me?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. Uh, this kind of tubes that you were saying,
Okay.
like these ones.
Okay.
Okay. This kind of voids that are related to the shrinking shredding process are more like planar voids, and I will show you some pictures in the next class that present some effect of these cracks. In January, the microfabric did not present a B fabric in these cases, but these materials, the compression and the pressure, they produce some B fabrics in the fin sections. I will show you in the next classes. When we have only this alluvial clay, they did not present different B fabric, only when we didn't present organization or a very good organization. So in this case, it's very easy to understand that these are infillings, and these are materials that migrate from the surface to the subsurface because they have these extension lines and they have the interference color, so they have this B fabric. And when we compare the B fabric of alluvial features like these ones and stress features, they are very different, but I want to talk about this in the next class when we discuss about how micromorphology could help us to understand that. So yes, what you say is right, very right. The B fabric of these materials help us a lot to understand or differentiate between alluvial features and stress features. But let's talk about this in the next class, okay?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And we also have other feature, that's the Mukara. Mukara feature, it's other kind of feature related to action of high activity clays and produce this wavy transition between horizons. Like you can see here, this wavy transition between horizons are generally related to high activity clays that induce the migration of clay from the bottom horizon, from the subsurface to the surface horizon, and produce wavy transitions. These wavy transitions help us a lot to understand that this material was formed in a condition that favored the presence of high activity clays. So even if I study this material right now, and now I just can find goethite, kaolinite, hematite, alloysite, materials that are not expensive, I know that when this horizon was formed, it possessed high activity clays because the wavy transition between the horizons was formed by high activity clays. So it helps us a lot to understand that we present a high activity clay in the past. Okay, so this wavy transition is related to the presence of high activity clays. Even I can't find high activity clays today. Okay, it's really important to identify this, because especially in the tropics, when we when we dig very, very deep soils, some buried soils present wavy transitions, and these wave transitions could be related to the high activity clays, and generally they are related to high activity clays. Okay, it's not so common to identify these wave transitions very close to surface because they generally are related to wetter conditions, and so they did not present high activity clays. But when we are very deep horizons or layers and we have an incipient weathering, maybe we can find this kind of materials. Okay, this kind of features, I'm sorry. Okay, so wavy surfaces or wavy transitions between horizons, they express materials that are rich on clay, high activity clays, and they could tell us a lot about the climate conditions that form these layers, horizons, or soils. Okay, guys, until here, it's okay. By now, okay. Let's talk about the formation of models, concretions, and nodules, just to highlight how the concentration of iron or manganese help us a lot to understand how these materials express the formation of these horizons and layers. Models, concretions, or nodules are expressions of differences of color patterns, of color distribution in a specific horizon or layer. They could be related to depletion or concentration of iron and or manganese in the same specific horizon, and they express variation of age, express variation of the conditions, the availability of electrons, or how anoxic or oxy is that horizon or layer. For example, here we can see in this hand samples a specific sample that present a gray color, and we can see only one color partners, this gray color. Okay, so this horizon was formed in anoxic conditions and favored the weathering or the destruction of goethite and hematite if they were present. And we only have iron too, and kaolinite or other minerals, but we don't have iron oxides. But we can see some horizons that present this kind of color partners that possess a gray color and at the same time a red color, red or yellow or even orange or red on yellow color at the same time. Okay, in this cases we have these models, concretions, or nodules, depending on the material that we can see in the horizon or the layer. And they usually can form this kind of soil profiles that present several color partners and several materials. This express a variation of the water table or the tidal water or the oxy and anoxic conditions, the availability of electrons in the soil. Here we can see the two pictures that express different conditions, okay? Here we have a gray horizon and specific dots, specific spots with a red color. So the soil, this horizon present anoxic conditions, but in some specific months, specific phases, specific stage, the oxy condition is favored in specific sizes. For example, the roots are producing oxygen and increasing the oxygen content pressure in this horizon in specific dots, or the water table is not so high anymore and reduce or decrease or get down, and oxygen start to penetrate in soil in some voids, in the larger voids, and the presence of oxygen start to oxidize iron, and now I can see some iron oxides in some points. So we have an oxide stable condition that now are getting oxide condition in some phases and some months or even days, because this process is very fast, okay? And in this picture, we have the opposite condition. We have a soil that present dominant red or yellow color, an orange color in this case, we can see here. And very close to the void, we have a pile or whiter color. It's because this soil it's getting an anox condition, an water stagnant condition. So something get wrong or something happened in the soil and the water couldn't migrate anymore. So the high porosity or the well-drained condition that formed oxidized soils, oxide aggregates are changing for an oxide condition or a poorly drained condition, and now water stopped inside the voids, and now this stopped water, this stagnant water start to reduce the iron that's very close to the surface, and they are producing this white color. So the presence of the models, nodules, concretions, or even these chains of colors tell us a lot about how some process change through time. And it's very important to describe the position and the differentiation of the color inside the pads. For example, if I can see a gray horizon that present the surface very gray, but inside these pads, inside these aggregates, I can see yellow spots or red or yellow color, show us that this material was formed in gray conditions, in gray and stagnant conditions, in anoxic conditions, and now they are changing, and now we are producing these oxide conditions, okay? And we can see the opposite here, that we formed gray conditions, and now we have some penetration, we have the introduction of oxygen that could oxidize the iron very close to the surface, like here and here, and now we are producing iron oxides here. So the iron oxides was preserved inside the aggregate because we changed from an oxide to an oxide condition, or we can produce iron oxides or iron manganese oxides in the surface because we change from an oxide to oxide conditions, okay? We usually present examples with iron because iron it's much richer in the lithosphere and soil than manganese, okay? So we usually can't see so rich manganese oxides in the soil, but I will show you some. And this feature, these redoxomorphic features, the nodules, the models, or the concretions, could be described as redox concentration, masses, or nodules, or concretions, okay? So we can see in this cases some masses like this one that we can found a specific material. We have just a cloud of material inside a horizon that present gray colors. We can see some materials like these ones that present a particular individual organization or individual fabric that can be easily be differentiated from the rest, from the background, from the rest of the horizon or the soil, and did not present a specific organization. And we have these materials that present a specific organization. When we have this specific organization, when we have layers like this manganese oxide, we have a concretion. So this is a manganese oxide concretion, and this is an iron nodule. When we don't have an organization, an internal organization, an internal fabric, it's a nodule. And when we have an organization, when we can see layers, we are seeing a concretion, okay? So here we have masses, and here we have a nodule, and here we have a concretion. And between these reduced-morph features, we can see deflections when we have a horizon that present specific gray colors, like in this picture. We have a gray color or whiter color in comparison or comparing to the rest of the soil, comparing to the background, okay? Or like this one, so I have a red material that now presents some voids with this gray color, so they are redox depletions, especially iron depletions. So we are losing iron in the voids because this oxic soil are now in stagnant properties. They are developed stagnant properties, and we have stagnant water inside the voids that they are producing these gray colors. We also can present clay depletions, like we can see here in this picture that we present a different color in this area and in this area. Here we have a color that are more intense than here, and here we can see easily a richer coarse layer, like in this thin section. We can see here this strong or higher chroma color, this yellow color, and here we can see this pale or whiter color because we are losing fine material. We are losing fine clay fraction. And in this case, this material presents something like this color, whiter color, because they are losing clay material, they are losing color. And we can see the reduced matrix like here. It just produces these gray colors when the soil is formed in anoxic conditions. We have different kinds of reduced morphic features, okay? Like we can see iron masses, we can see nodules, we can see concretions, we can see surface coatings. We all see some of them, okay? So we can see here some masses of iron too, like this plintite crystal. We can see some masses of jarosite. So we can see this white, or this white, no, it's yellow color, this vibrant or high chroma yellow color associated to formation of jarosite masses. And we also can see some masses of iron tree, like this hematite masses. We can also see some iron nodules, cemented bodies of iron that did not present an internal fabric or internal organization. We can see plintites, that cemented materials that present coarse fragments inside the material, like this sand particles here. You can see in this case manganese concretions that present our internal fabric and this dark color. We can see the surface coating of iron. It's very common in arid and semi-arid regions. We usually call this like varnish, and this varnished surface, it's quite related to incipient weathering and incipient leaching. And when we saw a stone line that present this iron surface coating, we should relate this stone line to arid or semi-arid conditions, climate conditions. Okay, so tell us a lot about the incipient weather and incipient leaching, and because of that, we relate this material to a semi-arid or a arid condition. The surface coating of iron also is related to a desert pavement, and this desert pavement is related to areas that suffer a lot of runoff and so lose a lot of clay fraction and increase the content of sand or coarser fractions and produce a surface that present a lot of coarse materials and this iron surface coating. Okay, so this kind of surface coating, it's quite related to dry climate conditions. If you see this, you should know now we have dry conditions, or in the past when the surface or this material that now is buried was formed, we have dry conditions or even drier conditions than today. We should describe the quantity of these materials because it helps us a lot to understand the intensity of the migration of iron, the variation of the water table, the concentration of the iron. We also should describe the size of these materials because it also expresses the intensity of the formation of these materials. If I have extremely coarse or very coarse materials, so the migration and the concentration of iron or manganese was very intense. But if I present very fine materials, so the concentration of iron is not so intense, help us a lot to understand if I see in the same soil profile different sizes, I could relate from different ages, and I could understand how the oldest could be related to the coarser reducimorph features or these thinner reducimorph features, and how this could be related to climate change, and how could be related to drier conditions or wetter conditions, and how climate change, we can see different sizes of these materials. The contrast also help us a lot when we have colors of these materials that are very similar to the background, like these faint colors are not so easy to identify and to see these nodules inside the soil. So the migration of iron is not so deeply, or these materials are now changing, they are being destroying, and they are releasing iron from the background, and all the fabric present similar iron content in comparison to the iron nodules or concretions. Or we can see a distinct color that we can see easily, the difference of colors in here in these gray regions, and these zones, these spots we have yellow colors, but we also can present distinct colors, like in this case, that show us, okay, the migration of iron, it's very intense. This process could be young or old, it's not a problem, but it's very intense. And why it's very intense? So the variation of chemical or climate condition and physical and chemical conditions are very abrupt. They are very fast. Okay? Of course, we should describe the color using the color Munsell chart. And we should describe the moisture state of these materials in dry and moist conditions, depending on how you describe this in the field, because there is a lot. Moist reducimorph features are related to modern soils, and dry features are related to paleosols or even older reducimorphic features, okay? And we should describe the shape of these materials, because the shape tells us a lot how iron was concentrated or released by the soil. How cubic is not an example of iron oxide, but just to see that in this case we have a cubic shape, but could be related to the pyrite crystal, as I show you. A calcite cylindral nodule, in this case, this Rhizophilis that we saw in the beginning of this class, they present a cylindrical shape. Spherical iron nodules, in this case. Spherical and thread-like iron masses, we can see this spherical and this thread-like, they are like some roots, okay, and show us that we have two different processes that create these iron masses. You can see these platy manganese nodules in this case. We can see this lenticular gypsum nodule. Dendritical fulgurites. These fulgurites, they are produced by the action of storms in soil that create these materials inside the soil. We can see, of course, the most abundant shape is irregular. So it is irregular calcite nodule. And now we finish the description of the soil and how these features can help us to understand how soil properties that can change through time. In the next class, we'll discuss how some analysis could help us to describe this change. So we will start with micromorphological analysis, and after that, like how some isotope analysis, like radiocarbon and other analysis, could help us to understand how soil properties change through time. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
JJ,
Okay.
I
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
I would like to know how is going to be the evaluation of this course? If it's going to have an activity or test.
Johanna, probably will have an exam with some questions that I share with you, and you need like 1 week. You have 1 week to answer this. Okay, so it's not a problem. You can consult the material. There are some practical and theoretical questions about how can we use the morphological features and some analysis to understand the evolution of soil. Okay?
Okay, great.
Okay, good, good. Any more questions? No, no. Okay, okay. So thank you very much and see you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks.
See you guys.
See you.